I really want to thank you for inviting me into your world, this brave new world of data centers. I've gotten a glimpse of the terrain this week. It's exciting, a little scary, as all good adventures should be. And you know what's so funny is, especially with this high-tech crowd, when I was thinking of my remarks, I was actually going back to Thomas Jefferson for a couple of reasons. One, it's this morning, 280 miles south of here, that Thomas Jefferson's home in Monticello is opening a visitor's center. It has, and it's such a nice play of using sustainable features and information technology to provide a bridge back to Monticello. This for the man who coined the phrase, information is the commerce of democracy. But I was also mainly thinking, reflecting back on the first congressional briefing that we had at the U.S. Green Building Council about 8 years ago. And it was just starting. A number of elected officials and staff wanted to know, what is this? What's happening? And so we were answering a variety of questions. And one of them asked an architect, a colleague of ours that was on the board, and said, but does anything more need to happen? And Bob Berkebile answered something like this. If Thomas Jefferson were back in the neighborhood today in Washington, D.C., he'd be amazed at the changes in information and transportation. He would have written a message by hand, sent it by boat, waited for weeks and weeks or months for a response. And today, of course, that can be accomplished in an instant. But then he'd look at how we're building our homes and other buildings, and he'd say, it's not so unlike what we were doing in Monticello 200 years ago. Why aren't your houses making their own energy? Why aren't the landscapes cleaning the air and the water? What a great metaphor. And you know, I was thinking of that recently when I saw a federal report that was saying that in the building industry, productivity has on average gone down 0.6% every year. In contrast to the manufacturing industries as a whole, whose productivity has increased on average 1.5% over the last 40 years. This in an industry that makes up 15% of our gross national product in the United States. And I know that, 30% of the audience is from outside the United States. It's about 10 or 12% worldwide. This in an industry that is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, not industry per se, not transportation. It's the building industry because of the energy we consume and the energy embedded in the materials. And it has a larger footprint than many other industries in other ways as well. And this is in an industry that creates these buildings in our homes and our workplaces where we happen to spend 90% of our lives. Surely, this is a place for game changing. And so today, what I wanted to do this morning was to take you on kind of a whirlwind tour of this dynamic, exuberant world of green buildings. Not specifically data centers, but to put them in the context of the overall green building market. Because I think what I've come to appreciate so much in the last year or two, but certainly in the last couple of weeks, is how dependent that industry is going to be on the information technology and the power sources that it uses to take it to the next level. So what I'm going to be doing in the next 30, 35 minutes or so is to take you on a tour of those green buildings, to focus a little bit on the business drivers, and then because your industry is changing so quickly, is so dynamic, has so much innovation coming into it, I wanted to give you a glimpse of a couple of leading edge concepts in my world of green buildings. When I was talking about LEED, you know, the whole idea of market transformation that we see with Energy Star and with LEED is that you get a system out there, usually voluntary, that kind of rewards best practices, right? The top part of the market. And then when there's enough experience in the marketplace, hopefully industry associations and government will build that into codes and standards. In green building, ASHRAE and a coalition of interests is going to be bringing the first green building standard to market this year. Called Standard 189. Meanwhile, LEED itself is evolving upward to be more and more rigorous because the market has learned how to do this. Well, what goes beyond LEED? Or what goes beyond platinum? This is what is behind an effort called the Living Building Challenge, born largely in the Cascadia chapter, which is Alaska, British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, Ecotopia. And the idea is not so much the flexibility in credits, no, it's 24 requirements. And it uses the flower as a metaphor. Let me read this. Rooted in place and yet harvests all its own energy and water, is adapted to climate in sight, operates pollution-free, promotes health and well-being, is comprised of integrated systems, is beautiful, giving credits for each of those. Now, at least 80 teams around the country, I think a couple outside the country, are trying hard to meet this, at least to get petal by petal, credit by credit. In Portland this last week, up to 80 people have worked week-long in a charrette to see how they could apply this to a 220,000 square foot building. It's hard work. I've talked to a number of people that said it's the hardest thing they've ever done and the most exhilarating.
What do you think were the critical success factors in starting that voluntary standard?
Well, there were a number of critical success factors. I think one was the passion of the group. You know, there were so many people from a variety of disciplines that knew there was a better way of doing this. You know, I mean, as someone used to tell me at the Department of Energy when I was there, if we build airplanes like we build buildings, you know, they'd never get off the ground. And, you know, and it didn't happen overnight. If you look at the history of this, and I know you all are familiar with it, you know, we went backwards in time with some smart building concepts. We used to use open air ventilation. We used to have more daylighting. It was during the energy crisis in the 70s that we started tightening everything up and losing some of those features that were really important, like building orientation, taking advantage of wind. And so really it was in the 70s when a lot of architects and engineers started thinking, how do we bring back the best features of those buildings but keep the shell tight? And so it's been years and years, and so part of the success factor was simply the convergence of the right know-how and the technologies and the prices, and then leadership, passion, and having a market-savvy tool like LEED, I think, was very important. LEED was a success factor because it represented a lot of knowledge, the same kind of knowledge that Bill was just talking about that went into this leadership group that created the data center. It represented that, and it also was criticized at the time for not being more scientifically based, but it was market savvy, and it got that toehold in that gave it credibility. I think the 4 levels of achievement were smart because it was within reach. There was no excuse for the mainstream market to not go in and give it a try, yet it gave aspirations at the platinum level. If it stayed stagnant, it'd be a mistake, but the fact that it's moving and that there's a lot of impatience to keep improving, that's another success factor. So there's a few.
Great, thank you.
Okay.